Hey, what's going on, y'all? So recently I just caught up to Genshin Impact's Archon Quest. I finished 5.1 just a couple days ago after skimping out on 5.0, and I gotta say I'm loving it so far. Now I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little disappointed when I first saw how Natlan looked like, because it was just so far off from what I imagined. And I'm sure that many others felt the same way. It's not like this feeling was unwarranted, because in the main story, what we learned about Natlan was that it's a nation of dragons and war. So naturally, I expected some sort of vibe similar to Dark Souls, for example. But that's not really what we got. When I first entered Natlan, it felt like the narrator was telling me,
"Welcome to Jurassic Park."
Because there were just like dinosaurs and fucking Pokemon lying around everywhere. So when I found out that it was like an episode out of Teletubbies instead of like that, I was rightfully disappointed. But you know, I don't think my criticism really holds up anymore, because the more I thought about it, the more it makes sense just to start the story off on a positive, happy setting where, you know, you're just thinking about the adventure, because it'll juxtapose later with the despair and depression that's going to happen later on. I'm just trying to picture what it would look like if I got what I wanted. So just imagine if instead of the traveler arriving to Natlan and it's this lush scenery with these saurians walking about, with people hunting and like enjoying their time. Imagine if it wasn't that and it was this desolate like area, post-apocalyptic setting basically, where everybody was dying and there were people struggling just to survive. Imagine if I got that. The mini cataclysm that happens later on would have little to no impact, because we already are exposed to the same sense of despair and depression that happens as we go into the island. So it really makes no sense now that I think about it for it to be like that. But I do get why people would be disappointed, because we had those expectations set for us by the devs themselves, so yeah. There is one point of criticism that I do think is warranted, however, and that's the character designs. Now don't get me wrong, I do like most of them individually, but as a whole, representing the nation of Natlan, they just lack uniformity. And I do get that they're part of different tribes, so they represent those tribes and they look vastly different from each other, but it just makes the whole thing feel less cohesive. It's obvious that they were trying to make every tribe represent the different elements present in the game, but by doing that they kind of just shot themselves in the foot, because they had to make a vastly different design with a different color scheme and whatnot to represent those tribes. Now on its own, I don't think that issue is too bad, but the problem is they decided to go with some costume designs that are just very questionable and don't feel like they belong in Natlan at all. On one hand, you have characters like Kinich, Mualani, Kachina, or even Kitlali, who fit perfectly with the setting of Natlan, but on the other hand, you have characters like Mavuika, who's in a latex biker suit getup. Like, somebody please explain to me how that makes any sense in the context of Natlan. Maybe there's some cultural significance I'm missing here, I don't know, but to me it just feels so out of place. And then you have characters like Chaska, who is in a Bloodborne cowboy cosplay. And then we have Ororon, who's like straight out of Final Fantasy. It just makes no sense. Again, I want to reiterate that out of context, I do like their designs quite a lot. Well, aside from Chaska, but I do like their designs. It's just like in the context of fitting the aesthetic of Natlan, it just doesn't fit, man. I don't know, it just doesn't fit. I don't know what they were going for there. But that's about all the criticisms I have as a general overview of the region, because I do think that Natlan does a great job at pretty much everything else. I think the biggest thing that sets Natlan apart from any other region in the story is just how well it immerses you into their culture and traditions. And they do this pretty much at the very beginning of the story. And while yes, they do info dump you quite early on with terms such as Wayobs and ancient names and the histories behind them, or even what the pilgrimage is. Why are these different tribes competing against each other to fight against some common enemy, the Abyss? They deliver all this info in a very clever way, and that's through a vehicle of empathy, which is Kachina. In every other region, the traveler kind of just goes in like a clueless baboon, like, what the fuck is going on here, guys? Like, you gotta explain this shit to me, you know? And like Fontaine, for example, we're on that boat ride and with Charlotte, and she tells us about the missing people and how nobody knows where they went or whatever. Like, sure, that was foreshadowing Vache and everything that happened with that whole situation, but like, why should I care? You get what I mean? Like, that situation and mystery is really interesting. I'm down to get into the mystery van and get to the bottom of it, but there's no incentive for me to actually care about what's going on with the people of Fontaine yet. But with Kachina and Natlan, that's not really the case anymore, because I'm sure that in some way, shape, or form, people empathize with her emotions and situation. And because of that, we're given a reason to care about what's going on. We want to know about this situation. We want to know as much info as possible just to be able to help this kid in any way we can. Because we've been in similar situations before and we know just how hard it is to fight this battle alone. We see ourselves in Kachina and her struggles, and it really does touch my heart because even though she doesn't say it and outright rejects any offer to help, we know that she wants it because, well, much like us, we wanted that too. We wanted there to be somebody there to help us out when we're at our lowest. Somebody there to reach out that hand. It's kind of hard not to be invested into a story like that, especially if she's just a kid. She shouldn't be feeling this way at such a young age, so naturally it just triggers like an emotional response. Us as humans, we want to help each other out. I think it was just a really clever way to get us to care about this info that's being handed out so early on. Anyway, I got a little sidetracked, lost in the sauce here, so let's continue on and talk about Mavuika. So shortly after that, we learned that she's actually a human playing the role of an Archon. Now that's interesting because in the arc prior to that, we had kind of a similar situation play out with Farina playing the role of an Archon. Except in that case, it was actually a quote-unquote role, as in a stage play. It was a masquerade. Masquerade of the Guilty, haha. But whereas Farina's case, it was more of a show. She was pretending to be an Archon for the sake of her nation. That's not really the case with Mavuika. Everybody knows that she's a human, and this has been a tradition for decades and centuries. But the question now is, why? Why did the Heavenly Principles assign the role of an Archon to a human? Why do that in the first place? Why not make an Archon that's just like the rest of the Archons? There has to be a reason for that. My guess or theory is that the Pyro Archon's potential is so great that they have to be nerfed in some way. Perhaps eventually, with an extended lifespan, the Pyro Archon could amass enough power to overthrow the Heavenly Principles one day. Obviously, we know they can't have that happening, so they kept them in line by nerfing them as humans. Now, it's important to note here that we're not sure if every iteration of the Pyro Archon was also destined to be human by the Heavenly Principles. Because the first Pyro Archon, which was Splanke, he was the only one that was directly chosen. So it's not clear whether Fanes or the Heavenly Principles actually intended for every single Pyro Archon to be a human, but that one was. And Splanke, he used the power of Renova, one of Fanes' shades, to directly change the rules of Natlan, making it so that every human could ascend to Archonhood. So yeah, it's not really clear if after that the Heavenly Principles actually found out about what happened and if they accepted that or not. But either way, they still decided to make Splanke the first Pyro Archon, so that question still lingers. Like, I don't think it's a far-fetched theory, right? Because we see what Mavuika was able to do with the help of Renova's power blasting a hole into the fake sky, which nobody else has been able to do until now. So just imagine, we know the power the Pyro Archon relies on sacrifice. So just imagine what would happen if there were a Pyro Archon one day that would sacrifice their entire nation or something. I mean, that's a fucking big load of power, you know what I mean? But yeah, I think at this point it's just impossible for us to know. But generally speaking about Mavuika, I think she's phenomenal as a character, man. I love what they did with her here, and Genshin usually does cope with the Archons. But in this case, I just love how she's at the forefront of everything. In all the other arcs, the Archons kind of take a step back in participating in the conflicts that's going on in their nation. But that's not the case here. Mavuika is putting that step forward, being the leader that she's supposed to be, and defending her people with her life. Even if she lost all her powers, even if she's reduced to just being a normal human with no Archon powers, she's still putting her life on the line. And it's not just the life she has in the present that she's putting forward, but also the life of her past. She had every right to just stay with her family and be with her loved ones in the present, passing on the mantle of Archonhood to somebody else. But she didn't do that. She didn't want to burden anybody else with this enormous responsibility that she knew she had to bear. So what does she do? She puts herself into hibernation for 500 years. All to fix a problem that wouldn't have affected her in any way should she had chosen to stay. And 500 years later, after holding this enormous burden, this gigantic shadow of responsibility on her shoulders. To save the nation, she gives up her life. She gives up everything. Now, what could be more admirable than that? I really do hope that in Act 5 we'll be able to save her from her impending death, rewrite the rules, so to speak. The Ode to Resurrection exists for that specific purpose, I imagine. I really want to have that moment after the fact where her responsibilities have been accomplished. She did her role, so she doesn't have to suffer any other consequences because of that. I think she suffered plenty and deserves a moment of respite, a moment of relaxation. It's the least she deserves. Man, it's making me emotional just talking about it right now. I really do hope that she survives next patch, man. I do not want her to die. It's gonna fucking destroy me. I already know it. Now, other than Mavuika, there were two other standout characters for me during this arc, and those were Mualani and Ororon. So for Mualani, man, she's just precious, bro. I just love Mualani so much, and her relationship with Kachina. She's like that one friend that everybody needs. She's always there to support her, even when others are talking behind her back. She ain't letting no shit slide, bro. I love how she just stands up for Kachina. The moment somebody tries to defame her image, she's there. She's the number one person to put her own image on the line to defend her friend. Now that's what you call a real one. I just love the relationship, dude. And just when you think she can't get more real than that, she hits you with the 1-2 Burger King combo. Forget putting her own reputation and image on the line to defend Kachina. She put her whole life on the line to do that. And everything really came full circle with her being chosen as one of the heroes. Out of the 6, I don't think anybody is more deserving of that title. Throughout the history of anime and manga, we've seen and experienced time and time again the story of the kid that was cursed and left out as garbage. The one who was shunned by the whole village or society for being different. Such is the case with Ororon. But he doesn't resent nor shun the villagers or the tribes or their people or his nation. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He's indebted to them. Because he was abandoned as a child, he was already fodder, he was left out to die by his own parents. So naturally, being saved by the nation, he feels like he owes something to them. What sets Ororon's story apart from the others is that he has no real goal or aspirations to cling on to. For example, like Naruto, he always wanted to become the Hokage to prove himself to him and his village and be loved by everybody. But love and companionship isn't something that Ororon is really drawn to. It's rather the sense of purpose that he wants to find in his own life. I'm sure that he appreciates the childhood that Kid Lolly was able to provide for him, but more than that, he wants to repay the debt that he feels like he owes to the nation. And I'm sure that so many people feel the same way. We feel like we owe a debt to our parents because they brought us into this world and we want to take care of them. And while many of us are still progressing towards that goal, looking for that opportunity to prove ourselves and make our parents proud, Ororon had that chance. He had his perfect opportunity to show his worth. But he failed. Even if he was shunned, even if he was feared by everybody in the tribe, even if nobody cared about him and used him as a tool, he still wanted to prove himself, and he was given that opportunity on a gold platter. But he just couldn't live up to their expectations. He'll never get a chance like that ever again. So he was left purposeless, wondering where to go next, what to do. He couldn't repay his debts, so should he just die? Would everybody be better off without him? Well, at least one person stopped him from doing that, and that was Kid Lolly. So instead of just offing himself, he picked up a profession, gardening. When left with no purpose, he turns to an avenue where he's able to give purpose to something else. Because at least these vegetables that he's growing, these radishes, they have worth. They have something that has purpose, something that they could be used for, unlike him. But when he finally got possessed and his life flashed before his eyes, he realized that in the end, sticking to that does nothing. He didn't accomplish anything with his life. That's why in the end, he decided that his purpose in life is to find his purpose. Instead of being stuck at that same spot until he dies, he decided to come back on track where the rest of us are. Ororon acknowledging his own weaknesses while still aspiring to be somebody special so he can find worth and purpose in his life is just so real. I love his story. Now, by now, you've probably noticed that I neglected to mention one character. The one, the only, the fucking GOAT, Capitano. Dog, where do I even start? Like, Capitano is just like... Anyway, sorry about that. As I was saying, Capitano just exceeded my expectations in pretty much every way. I mean, he's number one of the Fatui Harbingers, so of course, there were a lot of expectations surrounding him, but man, like, this dude shattered every single one. Every time I think Capitano can't get more goated, he does, bro. So for example, why is he in Natlan in the first place? Well, it's not because of the Tsaritsa. It's not because he wants to steal a Gnosis and use it for that. No, this guy pulled up to Natlan because some dude from 5 generations ago helped him out during his dire time of need. If I killed the word honor right now and reincarnated into a person, it'd be Capitano. Like, this dude is the epitome of honorable. He had no obligation to pull up to Natlan and save an entire nation from ruin. Not only that, he squared up against the Pyro Archon, a human. Well, they're both human, but it just doesn't feel like they are. Especially in that one cutscene where they're fucking flying around like Dragon Ball Z characters. Now, like most people, I just assumed that Capitano was gonna be one of the primary, if not the primary antagonist of the arc. But it turns out that, well, plot twist, he's actually our primary ally. Like, what the fuck? And the reason for that is rooted in his honor. And because of that, he's the only Fatui Harbinger that I feel we could completely 100% trust. If it were another Fatui Harbinger, say like Arlecchino, Dottore, or even Child, it'd be under a situation where they gain something from it, or if it's against a common enemy. But when all is said and done, they still feel like they're not our allies. But that's not the case with Capitano. It genuinely feels like he has no ill intentions whatsoever. It's still insane to me how the #1 enemy faction, aside from the Abyss Order that's against us this entire time, their top lieutenant, their #1, turns out to be the most altruistic. Like, damn, bro. My guy is humble. He's not afraid to admit defeat. He goes up to the Traveler and tells him to join his cause, not through force or violence, but through words and exchange of ideas. He cares about his subordinates deeply and even jeopardizes his entire mission to save the nation for one single life. He's not afraid to put his life on the line either, man. Like, how do you get so goated, bro? This whole time, the Fatui have kind of painted a bad picture or stigma against them because of everything they've done in the other nations, that we tend to forget that there are good people amongst them as well, and I just love how that's highlighted here. I really appreciate that. Also, just to add on to that, I don't think Capitano becoming an ally is a one-time thing. I think he's actually going to help us out in the future as well, unless he's kind of forced his hand to go against us by, let's say, Piero. Because in this quest, we learn that he's actually from Conria. Now, that's not a big surprise. I'm sure he's one of the generals that was in charge of amassing an army and fighting against the Abyss during the Cataclysm. But the important thing to take away here is that Capitano seems to hold our sister or our sibling at a high regard. Perhaps in this case, he also feels indebted to them because they helped out during the Cataclysm 500 years ago. So because of those factors, it just seems like he wants to avoid being our enemy at any cost. But yeah, I've been rambling on for far too long at this point. There's still stuff I need to talk about, like Renova and the Shades, or the origins of Sealies and elemental powers, but this video is already fucking longer than my dick, so we need to move on and talk about the main event of this patch, which was the Cataclysm, or the mini Cataclysm that happened. Because, bro, that shit was fucking cinema. The Inazuma War, and I'm using the word war very loosey-goosey here, the Inazuma War wishes it was half as good as this. Now this is how you do a war, and we really get to see here why Natlan is called the Nation of War. This is the shit I wanted to see and expected going into this arc. Now I know some people were complaining about the hot air balloon ride, but come on, dude. Like, the point of it being slow was so we could see the devastation unfold in Natlan in real time. You can't just breeze past by that. You need to take a second to take everything in. And I just love what they did here, because almost everybody's experiences with this are different. There are so many different options you can take, and each one leads to different casualties. There's actual consequences that come out of this quest, and I just fucking love that so much. For example, we have Vichama, which was one of the NPCs, or one of the most prominent NPCs that take part of this quest, and he's the one who helped us go after Kachina's ancient name. He dies. Like, there is a chance of him dying depending on what decisions you make during this portion of the quest. And I just love how there are consequences to your actions. It makes everything feel so much more immersive and real, and unlike most of Genshin, it gives actual weight to the decisions you make. And it does make sense, because for as strong as the Traveler is, he can't be everywhere at once. This is the first time that the Traveler and Paimon have experienced devastation and destruction on such a large scale, and they really did a good job at immersing you into that story. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I want to cover for this video. I think Natlan is shaping up to be the best arc in the series, especially considering this is a middle of the road patch. This is not the end of Natlan, even though it felt so climactic. I'm just really excited to see what else is in store for us, especially considering that next patch, it seems like we're gonna have a solo adventure with just the Traveler. And I'm really excited to see how they're gonna pull that off, because we never got something like that before. So yeah, I'm excited. With that being said, I rate Natlan's 5.0 Archon quest an 8.7 out of 10 and 5.1 a 9.3 out of 10. I think overall this is the strongest start to any arc we've ever had, and it's shaping up to be the best one as well. I honestly have no clue how they're gonna surpass Farina and that whole folklore situation at the end, because Fontaine's ending, as much as I give shit to the middle of the road stuff, like, I think the fucking prison stuff was mid as fuck, but Fontaine's ending, one of the best endings to an arc I ever experienced, and Farina is one of the best characters in fiction in my opinion. So yeah, I'm just really excited to see if they can even come close to surpassing that moment, but we shall see. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Follow me on Twitter in the description below, like, subscribe, all that jazz, and I will see you all in the next one. See ya!